Princess Arya had always been different from other royals. While her sisters focused on politics and diplomacy, she possessed something far more extraordinary: the ability to bend reality with just a thought. She could make flowers bloom instantly, create gentle winds on command, and even make her eyes sparkle like stars whenever she wanted. But what made her truly unique was how she used these gifts, especially around one particular person: Captain. David Stone had been her personal guard for 3 long years. He was a man of few words, always standing tall and serious, never showing emotion, even when the princess did the most amazing things right in front of him. This only made Arya more determined to get some kind of reaction from him. She had tried everything, making butterflies appear during their walks, creating rainbows in empty rooms, even making his armor shine brighter than gold. But David remained as still as a statue, always professional, always proper. At first, Arya thought it was just a fun game. She would wake up each morning thinking of new ways to surprise her guard. Now, during breakfast, she might make his coffee cup refill itself. While walking through the garden, she would make roses bloom exactly where he was about to step. She would create a cool breeze on hot days, but only around him. Watching as his hair moved gently while everyone else suffered in the heat, the other servants in the castle began to notice these strange happenings. They whispered among themselves about the mysterious events that seemed to follow Captain David everywhere. Some said he was blessed by the gods, others thought he had some kind of magic charm. David himself never acknowledged any of it. He would simply nod politely when flowers appeared in his path and continue with his duties, as if nothing unusual had happened. What Arya didn't realize was that David noticed everything. Every single flower, every gentle breeze, every sparkle. In her eyes, he saw it all. But he had trained himself to show no reaction, because he understood something the princess didn't. He was just a common soldier, the son of a blacksmith, while she was royalty with powers beyond imagination. There was a wall between them that could never be crossed, no matter how many magical tricks she performed. As weeks turned into months, Arya's little games became more creative. She discovered that David had a small scar on his left hand from his training days, so she began making healing herbs appear near him. She noticed he enjoyed the smell of jasmine, so she would make that scent drift through the air whenever they were alone. She even learned his favorite color was deep blue, so she started wearing more blue dresses and making blue flowers appear in the palace gardens. The princess began to realize that her magic wasn't just about showing off anymore. She found herself genuinely caring about David's comfort and happiness. When it rained, she would create invisible shields above him so he wouldn't get wet. During long guard shifts, she would make the temperature around him perfect. Not too hot, not too cold. She even started making his food taste better during meals. Though she had to be very careful not to let the castle cooks notice, David began to feel something strange happening inside him. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. The princess's presence started to affect him in ways he couldn't explain. When she smiled at him, he felt warmth spreading through his chest. When she laughed, the sound seemed to echo in his mind long after she had stopped. He found himself looking forward to their daily walks, even though he told himself it was just part of his job. The turning point came during a particularly difficult day. Arya had been in meetings with boring diplomats all morning, and she was feeling lonely and frustrated. She found David standing guard outside her chambers, looking as serious as ever. Without thinking, she used her powers to create a small private space around them, a bubble where sound couldn't escape and no one could see them clearly in that moment. Something shifted between them. Arya let her royal mask slip away, and David saw not a powerful princess, but a young woman who seemed tired and sad. For the first time in 3 years, he spoke to her not as a guard to his charge, but as one person to another. He asked if she was all right, and the genuine concern in his voice made her heart skip. They talked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Arya told him about the pressure of royal life, about feeling like she had to be perfect all the time. David shared stories about his childhood in the village, about dreams he had given up to serve in the royal guard. For those precious moments, they were just Arya and David, not princess and guard. But reality came crashing back when they heard footsteps in the corridor. Arya quickly dropped her magic, and David snapped back to attention. the moment was over. But something had changed between them. They both felt it, even though neither could say it out loud. That night, Arya made a decision that would change everything. She had always been curious about David's dreams, about what went on in his mind during the quiet hours of sleep. Using her most advanced magic, she cast a spell that would allow her to appear in his dreams, not to control them, but to visit them, to see the world through his eyes. When she appeared in his dream that night, David was sitting in a meadow that looked exactly like the one near his childhood home. In the dream world, he didn't have to be a guard, and she didn't have to be a princess. They were just two people who had found each other in a field of wildflowers. In that dream, David finally said the words he could never say in the waking world. He told her that he had noticed every flower she had ever made bloom for him, that he treasured every gentle breeze she had created, that her presence had become the most important part of his day. He confessed that he had been fighting his feelings for months, knowing that loving her was impossible. But unable to stop himself from caring deeply about her happiness, Arya woke up the next morning with tears in her eyes and a smile on her face. She finally knew the truth. David felt the same way she did. But she also realized that knowing this truth would make everything much more complicated. The game of magical teasing had started as innocent fun, but now it had revealed something real and deep and potentially dangerous. As she got dressed that morning, choosing another blue dress without really thinking about it, Arya wondered what would happen next. She had the power to make flowers bloom and create gentle winds, but she had no idea how to handle the feelings that were growing in her heart. All she knew was that the game had changed, and there was no going back to the way things were before. When David took his position outside her door that morning, he looked the same as always, serious, professional, perfectly controlled. But Arya could see something different in his eyes now, a warmth that hadn't been there before. He gave her the smallest nod, so subtle that no one else would have noticed, but she understood. The dream had been real for him too. The enchanted game had begun, but neither of them knew yet just how dangerous this game would become. After discovering David's true feelings through the dream, Princess Arya felt like a completely different person. The shy, playful teasing was over. Now she knew he cared for her just as much as she cared for him, and this knowledge made her bold in ways she had never been before. She decided that if they both felt the same way, then maybe the rules that kept them apart didn't matter as much as everyone thought. The next morning, when David took his usual position outside her chambers, Arya did something that shocked him. Instead of her usual polite royal greeting, she walked right up to him and placed her hand on his arm. The moment she touched him, she used her magic to create an invisible barrier around them, a bubble of silence where no one could hear their conversation. David's eyes widened in surprise. In 3 years of service, the princess had never touched him like this, and certainly never used her magic so openly around him. He looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone had noticed. But to everyone else, it looked like the princess was simply giving her guard his daily instructions. "I know what you told me in the dream," Arya whispered, her voice barely audible, even in their private bubble. "And I want you to know that I feel the same way." David's heart started beating so fast he thought it might burst. He had hoped that the dream was real, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel like the most wonderful and terrifying thing in the world. From that day forward, their relationship completely changed. Arya no longer bothered with subtle hints or small magical tricks. She became creative in ways that both amazed and worried David. During official royal meetings, she would use her powers to make him feel like he was the only person in the room. She would create the sensation of a gentle touch on his shoulder, or the feeling of warm sunlight on his face, even when they were in cold, dark chambers. David found himself living in 2 different worlds. During the day, he was still the perfect royal guard standing at attention, following orders, protecting the princess from any danger. But underneath his professional exterior, he was experiencing things that no other guard had ever felt. Arya would send him messages through magic that only he could understand. A sudden scent of roses meant she was thinking of him. A cool breeze in a warm room meant she wanted to see him smile. A feeling of warmth in his chest meant she was happy. The Princess became incredibly skilled at creating private moments within public spaces. During royal ceremonies, she would slow down time around them, giving them a few precious seconds to exchange glances that felt like conversations. In crowded hallways, she would create the illusion that they were completely alone, allowing them to walk closer together than protocol would normally allow. One evening, during a formal dinner with visiting nobles, Arya decided to try something that she had never done before. She used her magic to share her own senses with David, who was standing guard near the wall. Suddenly, he could taste the food she was eating, feel the silk of her dress, hear the conversations around the table as clearly as if he were sitting right next to her. The experience was overwhelming. David had to grip his sword tighter, to keep from stumbling as waves of new sensations washed over him. He could feel Arya's boredom with the endless political discussions, her amusement at the pompous behavior of the visiting lords, and something else, a constant, warm feeling that he realized was her affection for him, but sharing senses worked both ways. Arya suddenly felt David's strength, his alertness, as he watched for any potential threats, and his deep sense of duty. She also felt his worry not about physical danger, but about what they were doing and where it might lead. This glimpse into his thoughts made her realize that their secret relationship was causing him stress, even though it also made him happy. As weeks passed, their magical connection grew stronger and more complex. Arya learned to create entire conversations without speaking a word. She would touch a flower and fill it with a message, then use her magic to make sure David would be the one to find it. She created special chambers that existed only when she willed them into being private spaces where they could meet without anyone knowing. David found himself becoming dependent on these magical experiences. The normal world started to feel gray and empty compared to the vivid, enchanted reality that Arya created around them. He would count the hours until their next magical encounter, and he began to feel restless and incomplete when too much time passed without her magical touch. The princess also discovered that her powers were changing. The more she used them to connect with David, the stronger they became. She could now create illusions so realistic that even she sometimes forgot they weren't real. She could manipulate emotions not just in David, but in other people around them, making guards look away at the right moment or causing servants to suddenly remember urgent tasks elsewhere. This newfound power was intoxicating, but it was also dangerous. Arya began using her magic to solve every problem in their relationship. When David seemed worried about their secret, she would use her powers to calm his fears. When he felt guilty about neglecting his duties, she would create illusions that made it appear he was doing his job perfectly, even when he was distracted. One night, during a particularly intense magical encounter, something unexpected happened. Arya had created a beautiful garden that existed only in the space between reality and dreams. They were walking through moonlit paths lined with flowers that sang soft melodies when David suddenly stopped and grabbed her hand. "Arya," he said, using her name for the first time while they were awake, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." The seriousness in his voice made her magic flicker, and for a moment, the enchanted garden around them became transparent. "When I have feelings for you," David continued, "are they real feelings? Or are they something your magic has created?" The question hung in the air between them like a sharp knife. Arya felt her heart sink because she realized she wasn't entirely sure of the answer herself. She had been using her magic so freely, so constantly, that the line between natural emotion and magical influence had become blurred. She wanted to tell him that his feelings were completely real, but a small voice in her head wondered if her powers had somehow enhanced or changed what he felt for her. I don't know," she admitted, and as she spoke those words, the magical garden around them began to fade away. "I never meant to influence your feelings. I only wanted to show you mine." But even as she said it, she realized that her magic had become so much a part of their relationship that separating the natural from the supernatural might be impossible. David saw the doubt in her eyes and felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had fallen in love with a woman who could literally change reality with her thoughts. How could he ever be sure that what he felt was truly his own? How could she be sure that her feelings for him weren't somehow mixed up with the intoxicating power she felt when using her magic? As the magical garden disappeared completely, leaving them standing in an ordinary palace corridor, both Arya and David realized that their enchanted romance had led them into territory that was far more complicated than either had imagined. The game that had started with innocent flower tricks had become something that might be too powerful for either of them to control. They stood there in silence, both understanding that they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and neither knowing what would happen next. The question David had asked about whether his feelings were real or magical haunted them both for days. But instead of pulling them apart, it seemed to make their connection even stronger. Rhea became determined to prove that what they shared was genuine, while David found himself drawn deeper into her enchanted world. Even as he questioned everything he felt, Princess Arya decided that if magic had brought them together, then magic would help them discover the truth about their feelings. She began creating experiences that were so beautiful and intimate that they felt more real than reality itself. Using her powers, she built secret spaces that existed only when they were together, hidden rooms behind mirrors, doorways that appeared in empty walls, and gardens that bloomed in the space between heartbeats. Their first real meeting in one of these magical spaces happened 3 days after David's difficult question. Arya had been watching him during his evening patrol. Seeing how tired and confused he looked, she waited until he was alone in the castle library, then used her magic to transform the entire room into something that looked like a scene from a fairy tale. The dusty old books disappeared, placed by walls of living crystal that sparkled with their own light. The floor became soft grass, dotted with glowing flowers, and the ceiling opened up to show a sky full of stars that seemed close enough to touch. In the center of this magical space, a small table appeared with 2 simple chairs and a meal that smelled like home-cooked food. When David first saw the transformation, he stopped breathing for a moment. He had seen Arya do amazing things before, but this was different. This felt like stepping into a dream that was somehow more vivid than waking life. Arya appeared beside him, no longer wearing her royal gown, but a simple blue dress that reminded him of the clothes village girls wore during festivals. "This is just for us," she said softly, taking his hand. "No royal rules, no guard duties, no questions about what's real or fake. Just you and me, sharing a meal like normal people do." David felt his defenses crumble. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to relax completely. They talked for hours in that magical space. Arya told him about her childhood, about feeling lonely even though she was surrounded by people all the time. She shared her dreams of traveling to distant lands and seeing how ordinary people lived. David opened up about his family, about the younger sister he missed, and about the dreams he had given up when he became a royal guard. But the most amazing part was when Arya used her magic to show him her memories. She touched his forehead. Gently and suddenly, he could see moments from her life through her eyes. He saw her as a little girl, practicing magic alone in her room and accidentally setting her curtains on fire. He saw her watching him from her window during his training, exercises long before she had ever spoken to him. He saw how she looked at him during formal ceremonies and realized that she had been hiding her feelings just as carefully as he had been hiding his. In return, David shared his own memories, though he had to use words instead of magic. He told her about the first time he had seen her 3 years ago, when she'd been laughing with her friends in the garden. He admitted that he had volunteered for the position as her guard specifically because he wanted to be near her, even though he knew it was impossible to ever be anything more than her protector. These magical meetings became the most important part of both their lives. Arya would create different worlds for them to explore together. One night, they walked through a forest where the trees sang lullabies and the stream told stories. Another time they danced in a ballroom made of clouds, with music that seemed to come from the stars themselves. David found himself becoming addicted to these experiences. His normal life started to feel like a gray shadow compared to the brilliant colors of Arya's magical world. He would go through his daily duties like a sleepwalker, counting the hours until their next meeting, even when he was supposed to be focused on protecting the princess during official events. Part of his mind was always remembering their last magical encounter or anticipating the next one. Arya, meanwhile, discovered that her powers were growing stronger with each passing day. The more time she spent creating these magical experiences, the easier it became to bend reality to her will. She could now make changes that lasted for hours instead of minutes. She could create objects that felt completely solid and real, even though they existed only because she imagined them. But this growing power came with unexpected side effects. Arya began to lose track of what was real and what was magical. She would sometimes use her powers unconsciously, creating small changes in the world around her without meaning to. Flowers would bloom when she was happy. Rain would fall when she was sad, and the temperature would change according to her mood. David noticed these changes but didn't understand what they meant. He saw that Arya seemed different, more confident, more powerful, but also more distant from the normal world. She would sometimes look at him with an expression that made him feel like she was seeing something he couldn't understand. The turning point came during what should have been one of their most beautiful magical meetings. Arya had created a recreation of David's childhood village, complete with the house where he had grown up and the fields where he had played as a boy. She had built it all from his descriptions, making it so perfect that David felt like he had truly traveled back in time. We're walking through the magical village hand in hand when David suddenly stopped. "Arya," he said, his voice filled with wonder and concern, "how do you know what my mother's garden looked like? I never described it to you." He was looking at a small flower garden that was exactly like the one his mother had tended when he was a child, complete with the crooked wooden fence and the old apple tree. Arya froze, realizing that she had somehow pulled details from David's mind without even knowing she was doing it. Her powers had grown so strong that she was accessing his memories and thoughts without his permission. The magical village around them flickered and began to fade as her concentration broke. I don't know," she whispered, and for the first time since their magical romance had begun, she felt truly frightened. "I didn't mean to. I don't know how I knew that." David looked at her with a mixture of love and worry. He could see that her powers were changing her, making her into something more than human. He was beginning to understand that their magical romance might be beautiful. It was also dangerous in ways that neither of them had anticipated, as the fake village disappeared completely, leaving them standing in a plain storage room in the castle. Both Arya and David realized that their enchanted love story was leading them toward consequences that neither of them was prepared to face. The magic that had brought them together was becoming something beyond their control. They were both beginning to wonder if they were strong enough to handle what was coming next. That night, as they returned to their normal roles as princess and guard, both of them carried the same secret fear that the magic which had made their love possible might also be the thing that would ultimately destroy them. 3 months after their magical romance had begun, Princess Arya started feeling strange. First, she thought it was just because she had been using her powers so much lately. She felt tired all the time, even after sleeping for 10 hours. Her magic would sometimes work perfectly, and other times it would completely fail when she tried to use it. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came during a routine royal breakfast. Arya was sitting with her parents, the king and queen, when she suddenly felt dizzy. She tried to use her magic to make herself feel better, but instead of the usual gentle warmth, her power exploded outward like a lightning bolt. Every piece of glass in the dining room cracked at the same time, and all the flowers in the royal garden outside suddenly bloomed at once. Even though it was the middle of winter, the king and queen stared at their daughter in shock. Arya had always been careful to use her magic quietly and subtly around them. They knew about her abilities, of course, but she had never lost control like this before. "I'm sorry," Arya whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know what happened." Felt sick for a moment. David, who had been standing guard near the door, rushed forward to help her. The moment he touched her arm to steady her, something incredible happened. A warm golden light spread from where their hands met, and suddenly Arya felt perfectly fine. Her magic stabilized, and the cracked glass around the room slowly began to repair itself. But this moment of connection also revealed something that made both of them freeze in terror. David had felt something when he touched her, a tiny spark of life that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite magical. It was something entirely new, something that shouldn't have been possible. Over the next few days, Arya's condition became more obvious. She would have moments where her magic worked normally, followed by times when it went completely out of control. During one episode, she accidentally made it rain inside the castle library. During another, she turned all the roses in the garden into crystal sculptures that sang when the wind touched them. David noticed that his presence seemed to calm her magical outbursts. Whenever he was near, Arya's power became more stable. This led to them spending even more time together, which only made the situation more complicated. The other guards started to notice that Captain David was always the one who happened to be nearby when the princess had her. Mysterious episodes. The truth became undeniable. When Arya finally found the courage to visit the castle's healer, Anne, an old woman named Eleanor who had been taking care of the royal family for decades. Eleanor took one look at the princess and immediately knew what was happening. "Your Highness," Eleanor said gently, "you're going to have a baby. But this isn't an ordinary pregnancy. The child carries both human and magical blood, which has never happened before in the history of our kingdom." Arya felt like the world had stopped spinning. She had suspected this might be the case, but hearing it confirmed made everything feel terrifyingly real. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor looked worried. "I'm not sure, Your Highness." "The magical energy from the child is affecting your own powers, making them unstable. And I suspect the father isn't an ordinary man, or this wouldn't be happening at all." When Arya told David the news, he went completely pale. They were in one of their secret magical spaces, a quiet room that looked like a cozy cottage by a lake. The moment she said the words, the entire illusion flickered and almost disappeared. "A baby?" David repeated, sitting down heavily in one of the magical chairs. "But how is that possible? You said the child is both human and magical. That's never happened before." Arya nodded, tears streaming down her face. "The healer thinks it's because of how much magic I've been using around you. Somehow our connection has changed you. You're not completely human anymore, David. You've absorbed some of my magical energy over these months." David looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Now that she mentioned it, he had been experiencing strange things lately. Sometimes he could sense people's emotions without them saying anything. Occasionally, he would know things were about to happen before they actually did. He had thought it was just because he was becoming better at his job, but now he realized it was something much more significant. "What are we going to do?" "If the court finds out about this, they'll never accept it. A royal princess having a child with her guard is scandalous enough, but a magical child that shouldn't exist? They'll think it's dangerous." As if to prove his point, Arya's emotions caused another magical outburst. The cottage around them dissolved, and they found themselves standing in the real castle corridor. But the corridor wasn't normal anymore. The walls were shifting like water, and the paintings were moving like living things. "I can't control it!" Arya cried. "The magic is getting stronger, but it's also becoming wild. I'm scared I'm going to hurt someone." David took her hands, and again, that golden light appeared between them. The corridor slowly returned to normal, but both of them could see that this was only a temporary solution. Whatever was happening to them was getting worse, not better. Over the following weeks, Arya's condition became impossible to hide. Her magical outbursts were happening more frequently, and they were affecting the entire castle. Servants would find rooms that had changed shape overnight. Guards would discover corridors that led to places that didn't exist. The castle's own magical defenses were being disrupted by the chaotic energy radiating from the princess. The court's magical advisors, a group of elderly wizards who helped manage the kingdom's magical affairs, began investigating. They could sense that something was wrong with the magical balance of the castle, but they couldn't figure out what was causing it. David found himself changing too. His exposure to Arya's unstable magic was affecting him in ways that were both wonderful and terrifying. He could now see magical auras around people, which told him about their emotions and intentions. He could sense danger before it happened, making him an even better guard. But he was also becoming dependent on magical energy, the way other people needed food or water. The most frightening part was that they both realized their child would be born into a world that wasn't prepared for someone like them. The baby would have powers that no one understood and would face challenges that no parent could prepare for. One evening, Zarya sat in her chambers trying to control another magical episode. She felt a familiar presence approaching. It was her father, the king, and he wasn't alone. She could sense the magical advisors with him, and their energy felt worried and suspicious. "Arya," her father called through the door, "we need to talk. The advisors have some questions about the magical disturbances in the castle." Arya looked at David, who was standing nearby, and they both realized that their secret was about to be discovered. The magical pregnancy had made it impossible to hide their relationship, and now they would have to face the consequences of their forbidden love. As footsteps approached her door, Arya placed her hand on her still flat stomach and whispered a protective spell around the tiny life growing inside her. Whatever happened next, she was determined to protect their child, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. When the king entered Princess Arya's chambers with the three most powerful magical advisors in the kingdom, the air itself seemed to crackle with tension. The advisors could immediately sense the chaotic magical energy that had been disrupting the castle for weeks. Their faces grew pale as they realized the source of the disturbance was coming directly from the princess herself. "Arya," the king said softly, his voice filled with concern and confusion, "what has happened to you? The entire castle is being affected by magical storms, and our advisors tell me that you are at the center of it all." Princess Arya stood in the middle of her room, trying desperately to keep her magic under control. David remained at his post by the door, but she could feel his worry like a physical weight on her shoulders. She knew there was no point in lying anymore. The truth was literally radiating from her body in waves of unstable magical energy. "Father," she began, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something that will change everything. I'm going to have a baby, and the child's father is—" She looked at David, who stepped forward bravely, even though he knew this confession would probably cost him his life. "The child's father is me, Your Majesty," David said, kneeling before the king. "I have broken every rule of my position, and I accept full responsibility for what has happened." The king stared at them both in shocked silence. But it was the oldest magical advisor, a man named Theodore, who spoke first. "This explains the magical disturbances," he said, his voice filled with horror. "Your Highness, this child should not exist. A union between pure magical blood and human blood creates something that goes against the natural order of things." "What do you mean?" Arya asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Theodore looked at the other advisors before continuing. "The child will be neither fully magical nor fully human. Its very existence creates instability in the magical realm. The chaotic energy we've been sensing isn't just from your pregnancy, it's from the child itself. As it grows, it will become more dangerous to everyone around it." The king's face hardened as he processed this information. "David," he said coldly, "you have violated your oath as a royal guard, dishonored my daughter, and created a threat to the entire kingdom. The punishment for such crimes is death." "No," Arya cried, and her emotional outburst caused another magical explosion. The windows in her room shattered, and the walls began to glow with an eerie blue light. "If you hurt him, I'll never be able to control my powers again. Can't you see? He's the only one who can stabilize my magic." This was true. Whenever David was near, Arya's chaotic energy became more manageable. The advisors had noticed this pattern. They realized it meant that David had been fundamentally changed by his exposure to her magic over the months. "The human has absorbed magical energy," Theodore observed, studying David with fascination and disgust. "He's no longer completely human, which explains why this impossible pregnancy could occur. But this only makes the situation more dangerous." Over the next several days, the royal court was in complete chaos. News of the princess's pregnancy spread quickly among the nobles, and everyone had a different opinion about what should be done. Some demanded that David be executed immediately. Others insisted that the pregnancy should be ended before the child could be born. A few suggested that both Arya and David should be banished from the kingdom forever. Meanwhile, Arya's condition was getting worse by the day. Her magic was becoming so unstable that she couldn't leave her chambers without causing accidents. She would try to pick up a book, and it would burst into flames. She would look at a mirror, and it would show her scenes from other places and times. Even her tears had magical properties now, turning into small crystals that glowed with their own light. David spent every moment he could with her, knowing that his presence was the only thing keeping her magic from completely destroying the castle. But he was changing too. The constant exposure to her chaotic energy was making him more magical and less human with each passing day. He could now see things that others couldn't, and sometimes he would know what people were thinking before they said it. One evening, as they sat together in her chambers, David made a decision that would change everything. "Arya," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about what the advisors said. Maybe there's a way to fix this." "What do you mean?" she asked, though her heart was already filling with dread. "The magical chaos is happening because I'm caught between being human and being magical. If I chose one or the other completely, it might stabilize everything." David took her hands, and that familiar golden light appeared between them. "I could use all the magical energy I've absorbed to create a protective barrier around our child. It would burn through my life force, but it would make sure the baby is born safely and normally." Arya felt like her world was collapsing. "You're talking about dying, David. I won't let you do that." "It's not just dying," he said gently. "It's choosing to use my life to give our child a chance at a normal life. The baby would be born appearing, completely human with its magical abilities, hidden until it's old enough to control them safely." As if responding to their conversation, the baby moved inside Arya's womb, and a wave of surprisingly calm energy spread through the room. For a moment, both parents felt a sense of peace and rightness about David's proposal. But before they could make any final decisions, the door burst open. The king and all his advisors rushed in, their faces filled with panic. "The magical disturbances are spreading beyond the castle," Theodore announced. "Villages for miles around are reporting strange phenomena. This situation has become a threat to the entire kingdom." The king looked at his daughter with tears in his eyes. "Arya, I love you more than life itself, but I cannot allow our people to suffer because of this situation. The advisors have prepared a ritual that will end the magical chaos, but ... double quotes, he couldn't finish the sentence. "But it will require a great sacrifice," Theodore completed. "Either the child must be prevented from being born, or someone must absorb all the chaotic energy and discharge it safely. The second option would almost certainly result in death for whoever attempts it." David stepped forward without hesitation. "I'll do it," he said simply. "I caused this situation, and I'll fix it." Arya grabbed his arm, her magic flaring wildly. "There has to be another way. You can leave the kingdom, go somewhere far away where our child won't be a threat to anyone, and live in hiding forever," David asked sadly. "What kind of life would that be for our child?" "No, Arya. This is the right thing to do." The ritual took place at midnight in the castle's great hall. David stood in the center of a complex magical circle, with the advisors positioned around him. Arya was allowed to be present, but she had to remain outside the circle for her own safety as the ritual began. David felt all the magical energy he had absorbed over the months being drawn out of him. But instead of simply dissipating, he managed to shape it into something beautiful and protective. With his last conscious thought, he wove a spell around his unborn child, a spell that would hide its magical nature, till it was old enough to handle such power responsibly. The magical chaos that had been building for months suddenly calmed. The castle stopped shifting and changing. The impossible weather patterns ended. And Princess Arya, though heartbroken beyond measure, found that her own magic had stabilized. 3 months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby who appeared completely human. The child showed no signs of magical ability, though sometimes, when playing in the garden, flowers would bloom where the little one walked, just as they had once bloomed in David's footsteps. Arya never used her magic frivolously again. She became a wise and compassionate ruler, always remembering the price that had been paid for her happiness. And sometimes on quiet evenings, She would tell her child stories about a brave guard who had loved them both so much that he gave his life to ensure their future. The child grew up strong and kind, carrying the best qualities of both parents. And though the magical abilities remained hidden, the love that had created them burned bright and true, proving that some things are more powerful than magic itself.